My name's Richard. I'm 35, and I thought I had it all figured out. My wife, Jennifer, 33, was everything I'd ever wanted. We've been married for 8 years, and it all started back in college. It was one of those whirlwind romances where everything clicked. The connection was immediate, and we were inseparable. Our friends always joked about how sickeningly in love we were. You know, the kind of couple that always finishes each other's sentences and never stops holding hands? That was us. The first few years were incredible. Jennifer was my best friend, my partner in crime, and our love life was as fiery as it could get. We traveled, we laughed, we built a life that seemed almost too perfect. And yeah, maybe it was. About 3 years ago, things began to shift. Slowly at first, like the tiniest crack in a window you do not notice until it spreads. Jennifer became distant. She worked late more often and started taking more girls' trips. At first, I did not think much of it. Everyone needs space, right? But our intimacy, it practically vanished. We went from a wild, passionate love life to a cold, mechanical routine. Once a month, maybe, if I was lucky. Every time I tried to talk about it, she would brush me off, saying I was being insecure or needy. Looking back, maybe I was naive. I trusted her blindly, thinking it was just one of those rough patches that couples go through. Boy, was I wrong. It all came crashing down one weekend. We were at our friend Mark's wedding. Mark's one of my oldest friends, and Jennifer was a bridesmaid. I had noticed she'd been acting weird all day, nervous, constantly glued to her phone, and disappearing for long stretches. I figured it was the stress of the day. Being a bridesmaid is a lot of work, right? But something wasn't right. I could feel it deep in my gut, that sick, gnawing feeling that tells you something's horribly wrong, but you try to ignore it because you do not want to know the truth. The reception was in full swing, but I was sitting alone at our table, nursing my third whiskey when Emma, one of the other bridesmaids, came up to me. She looked concerned. "Richard, have you seen Jennifer? We need her for some photos, and I can't find her anywhere." My stomach twisted. "Last I saw, she said she was going to the bathroom," I replied, my voice sounding more distant than I expected. I tried to shake the feeling off. Maybe she just got caught up talking to someone. But Emma frowned. "That was over an hour ago. I've checked all the bathrooms. She's not there." A chill ran through me. Something wasn't right. I stood up, downing the rest of my drink in one go. "I'll go look for her," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I wandered around the reception hall, checking every corner, my anxiety growing with each step. The dance floor? No sign of her. The bar? Empty. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a side door slightly ajar, leading to a dimly lit hallway. My heart raced. I walked toward it, my legs feeling like they weighed a ton, each step slower than the last. The silence was suffocating, my mind swirling with worst-case scenarios. As I got closer, I heard voices, muffled, but unmistakably Jennifer's. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. This was it. Whatever I found behind that door was going to change everything. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open, and my world shattered. There she was, my wife, pinned against the wall, her bridesmaid dress hitched up around her waist. And there, tangled up with her, pants around his ankles, was her lover, the best man, of all people. I didn't even know what to say. I stood there, paralyzed, as they were too wrapped up in their little affair to even notice me at first. It wasn't until Jennifer's moans reached a fever pitch that she opened her eyes and saw me standing there, frozen in horror, her face drained of color. "Richard," she gasped, shoving the best man away. It's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. I stood there, completely paralyzed, the image of Jennifer with that man burned into my mind. Time seemed to slow down as everything hit me at once. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak. My wife. My wife was tangled up with another man. And not just any man. The best man, of all people. I finally found my voice, though it felt like a stranger was speaking for me. "Are you kidding me, Jennifer?" I hissed, trying to keep the anger from boiling over. My hands were shaking, and I clenched them into fists to stop myself from doing something I would regret. She scrambled to adjust her dress, her face flushed with a mix of guilt and fear. The best man, Dave, a guy I vaguely knew from her work, was fumbling with his zipper, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Richard, please," Jennifer stammered, stepping toward me. "Let me explain." I laughed. I could not help it. It was the kind of laugh that came from disbelief, from the sheer absurdity of the situation. "Explain? You want to explain this?" I gestured between her and Dave, my voice rising. "At our friend's wedding? In some random hallway?" Dave opened his mouth, but whatever apology he was about to offer died in his throat when I shot him a look that could kill. He mumbled, "I'm sorry, man. We didn't mean for it to happen like this." "Oh, that makes it better, doesn't it?" I snapped, my voice shaking. "You didn't mean for me to find out." "That's rich." Jennifer had the nerve to glare at me like I was the one in the wrong. "Keep your voice down, Richard," she hissed, glancing nervously toward the reception hall. "You're causing a scene." I couldn't believe my ears. "I'm causing a scene?" I said, practically spitting the words. "You were just screwing the best man in a public hallway at a wedding, and you're worried about me causing a scene?" She folded her arms defensively, her expression hardening. "If you hadn't been so distant, Richard, maybe I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere for attention." I blinked, stunned by her audacity. "Oh, so this is my fault now? You're actually blaming me for your affair?" "Maybe if you weren't so wrapped up in your own world," she said, her voice cold, "you would have noticed I was unhappy. But you didn't. You've been distant for months, Richard." I could barely contain the rage bubbling inside me. "You have got to be kidding me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. This has nothing to do with me. I'm not psychic, Jennifer. I didn't know you were secretly a cheating liar. How long has this been going on?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She couldn't look me in the eye, and that told me everything I needed to know. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "I gave you everything. Everything, Jennifer. And this is what you do? With this guy?" I glanced at Dave, who was still standing there, awkwardly trying to fix his clothes. "Richard, please," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Can we talk about this later? Privately?" "I don't think there's anything left to talk about," I said, stepping back. "You've already destroyed everything." Unable to stay in that suffocating hallway any longer, I turned and walked away, the sound of Jennifer calling my name fading behind me. I pushed through the exit door, gasping for air as I stepped outside into the cool night. My head was spinning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I walked to my car, but I didn't even know where to go. Home? Back to the wedding? It all felt like a nightmare. The woman I had loved for 8 years, the woman I had trusted completely, had betrayed me, and I didn't know what to do. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the steering wheel, my mind racing. All I could see was that image, Jennifer in that hallway, tangled up with Dave. Her excuses, her deflections, all of it swirling in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. When I finally drove home, I don't remember much about the drive. I barely remember parking or stumbling into the house. I just remember sitting on the couch in the dark, a bottle of whiskey in my hand. The same couch where, only a week ago, Jennifer and I had curled up together, watching movies like nothing was wrong. I thought about those nights, how she would rest her head on my chest, and I would kiss the top of her head, thinking everything was perfect. How could I have been so blind? I took a long drink from the bottle, letting the burn of the whiskey numb me, if only for a moment. But it wasn't enough. Nothing could dull the pain of what I had just witnessed. I had loved her, trusted her, and it had all been a lie. As the hours dragged on, I thought of every little thing I had missed. The late nights at work, the sudden girls' trips, the way she had pulled away from me. How could I have been so stupid? How could I not see it? I don't know how long I sat there, lost in the haze of alcohol and heartbreak. But when I heard the front door creak open, I knew who it was. Jennifer had come home, and I wasn't ready for what came next. The front door creaked open, and I didn't even have the energy to move. I heard Jennifer's footsteps as she cautiously stepped into the living room. The soft glow from the kitchen light cast long shadows on the walls, and I could feel her standing there, watching me, unsure of what to say. Richard, she finally whispered, her voice trembling. Can we talk? I stayed silent, staring down at the half-empty whiskey bottle in my hands. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I was too exhausted to let it out. Too broken, too numb. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes scanning the room like she was afraid of what she might find. I'm sorry, she said, barely above a whisper. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You're sorry? I repeated, shaking my head. That's all you've got? You cheated on me, Jennifer. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and all you can say is that you're sorry. Her eyes filled with tears, and she wrung her hands together like she was trying to hold herself together. It was a mistake, she whispered. A stupid, stupid mistake. It meant nothing. I swear, Richard, it won't happen again. I finally looked up at her, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and disbelief. It won't happen again? I said, my voice shaking. How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to trust you after everything? You didn't just make a mistake, Jennifer. You made a choice. And that choice destroyed everything we built together. She sank down onto the couch, keeping her distance from me, like she knew how fragile everything was now. I never wanted you to find out like that, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I scoffed. So what? You were just going to keep lying to me? Keep pretending like everything was fine while you snuck around behind my back? I took another swig of whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, but it wasn't enough to drown out the pain. Jennifer wiped at her eyes, tears streaking down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, Richard. I swear. I shook my head. Stop. Just stop. I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. The damage was done, and nothing she said could fix it. I love you, she whispered, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. I never stopped loving you. I laughed again, but this time it felt like a punch to the gut. Love? I said, my voice cracking. You call this love? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? You destroyed everything, Jennifer. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and now you expect me to just, what? Forget it? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I know I've messed up, but we can get through this. We can fix this. I don't want to lose you. I stood up, my hands trembling as I tried to control the storm of emotions swirling inside me. It's too late for that, I said, my voice hoarse. You've already lost me. Jennifer looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Richard, please. We can go to therapy. We can. No. I cut her off, my voice firm. There's no fixing this. There's no going back. She started sobbing, her hands covering her face as she rocked back and forth on the couch. It was the kind of crying that tore through the room, desperate and raw, but I couldn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't feel anything for her in that moment. I think you should leave, I said, my voice cold and distant. I need space. I can't even look at you right now. She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she stood up, her movements slow and defeated. I'll go, she whispered. But this isn't over, Richard. I still love you, and I'm not giving up on us. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I watched as she walked to the door, her footsteps heavy with regret. When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence in the room felt suffocating. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the empty space where she had been, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The whiskey burned in my throat, but it was nothing compared to the fire raging in my chest. How could everything I thought I knew about my life be ripped away in an instant? How could she betray me like that? I stayed like that for hours, until the sun began to rise, casting a dull light over the room. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence, but I didn't bother checking it. I knew it would be Jennifer, trying to reach me, trying to fix what she had broken. But there was no fixing this. Not anymore. When I finally picked up my phone, I wasn't ready for the messages. Missed calls, unread texts, all from Jennifer. Apologies. Please. Promises that she would do anything to make it right. But how could she make something like this right? On the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. For a moment, I thought it was Jennifer, coming back to try again. But the knock was too persistent, too insistent. Groaning, I forced myself off the couch and stumbled to the door. It wasn't Jennifer. It was Emma, her face filled with a mix of pity and concern. She stepped inside, taking one look at me and the mess of empty bottles scattered across the room, and sighed. "Richard," she said softly, her voice filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry." I could feel the tightness in my chest return, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Did you know about the affair?" She looked away, guilt washing over her features. I had my suspicions. I saw her with Dave a few times, but I didn't have proof. And when I confronted her, she denied everything. I clenched my fists, the rage bubbling up once again. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to," Emma said, her voice shaking. "But I thought it was over." She swore it was just a one-time thing, and I believed her. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet room. We both believed her lies. Emma stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Richard, you didn't deserve this. No one does. But you can't let it destroy you." I shook my head, feeling the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I thought she was my everything." "You have to decide what you want now," Emma said gently. "This is your life, Richard. Don't let her choices define you." I nodded, though the words felt hollow. What did I want? My wife? My life back? But the reality was, nothing would ever be the same again. And deep down, I knew what I needed to do, even if it shattered what little hope I had left. After Emma left, the silence returned, but it felt different this time, heavier. The weight of everything pressed down on me, and I knew I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I couldn't sit on this couch, drowning in whiskey and regret, while my life fell apart around me. I stared at the phone for a long time, my mind racing. I had been avoiding it for days, knowing that whatever decision I made would be irreversible. The thought of divorce, it felt like a hammer to the chest. But staying in this broken marriage, I wasn't sure if I could do that either. By the time night rolled around, I had made up my mind. I needed to stop running from this. I needed to face it. I was not the same man I had been a few days ago, and there was no going back. I spent the next day looking up divorce lawyers, reading through article after article about the process. It was overwhelming, splitting assets, figuring out who gets what, the house, the car, the bank accounts. I was staring at this endless sea of legal jargon, and all I could think about was how I never thought this would be my life. How had it come to this? By evening, I had a list of names and numbers in front of me, divorce attorneys printed out, scattered across the kitchen table. That was when I heard the door creak open. Jennifer was home. I watched as she stepped inside, her eyes immediately landing on the papers in front of me. She froze, her face cycling through emotions. Shock, guilt, fear. What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't even look up. "I'm filing for divorce, Jennifer." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she was too stunned to speak. "Divorce?" she whispered, her voice cracking. No, Richard, please. We can work this out. We can go to therapy. We can fix this." I stood up slowly, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. "What is there to fix?" I asked, my voice flat. "You didn't just cheat on me, Jennifer. You lied, you betrayed me, and you did it in the most humiliating way possible. At Mark's wedding, in some dirty hallway, with a man you've been sneaking around with. There's no fixing that." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw real fear there. "Richard, I'm begging you," she said, her voice desperate. "I still love you. Doesn't that count for something? Can't we try?" I shook my head, feeling my chest tighten with a mix of pain and anger. "You say you love me, but love doesn't do this. Love doesn't tear someone apart like this." She stepped toward me, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Please, Richard. I know I've made the biggest mistake of my life, but we can get through this. We've been together for 8 years. We can't just throw that away." I took a deep breath, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "You're the one who threw it away, Jennifer. Not me. The moment you decided to sleep with him, You ended everything we had." Her tears came harder, and she collapsed into a chair, her body shaking. "I never meant to hurt you," she sobbed. "I still love you, Richard." I never stopped. For a moment, I hesitated. I had loved this woman, truly, deeply, and part of me wanted to believe her, to reach out, to take her in my arms and tell her we could somehow make this right. But another part of me, the part that had seen the truth, the part that had watched her with another man, knew better. "I love you too, Jennifer," I said softly, my voice cracking. "I probably always will. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes the hurt runs too deep. The trust is too broken. And that's where we are now." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I hated how formal we had become, like two strangers negotiating the end of a business deal. There was a coldness between us now, a distance that could never be bridged. "Okay," she finally whispered, her voice broken. "If that's what you want, I won't fight you." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. I nodded, though it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice hollow. She stood up slowly, her body trembling. "I'll move out this weekend," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll stay at my sister's for a while." I nodded again, unable to say anything else. We stood there for a long moment, just staring at each other, as if we were both waiting for the other to say something that would fix everything. But no words came. Nothing could fix this. As she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had been my everything, my partner, my love. And for a fleeting moment, I mourned her. I mourned us. But that woman, that love, it was gone now, buried beneath the weight of betrayal and broken promises. The door closed softly behind her, and I was alone again. Alone in the house we had built together, surrounded by memories that now felt like a cruel joke. The silence was deafening, and the weight of everything hit me all at once. It was over, truly over. Jennifer would be gone by the weekend, and with her, my old life would disappear too. The weekend came quicker than I expected. I spent those few days in a strange haze, drifting through the house like a ghost. I didn't sleep much, just wandered from room to room, staring at the life Jennifer and I had built together. The wedding photos on the wall, the framed pictures of us on vacation, the little things that seemed so insignificant before. Everything felt tainted now, like the memories had been rewritten by her betrayal. When Saturday morning came, Jennifer arrived with a couple of suitcases. She looked as drained as I felt, her eyes red from crying, her movements slow and mechanical. We didn't speak much as she moved through the house, packing up her things. The silence between us was thick, full of everything we weren't saying. It was surreal watching her pack up her life, piece by piece, folding clothes that I had watched her wear for years, packing away the books she loved, the gifts I had given her. Each item she touched felt like another wound, a reminder of how much I had lost. I tried to stay out of the way, retreating to the kitchen while she worked. But the walls felt like they were closing in on me, the air too thick to breathe. I poured myself a drink, even though it was barely noon, and sat at the table, staring at the papers that had been scattered there for days. Divorce lawyers, separation agreements, the cold, clinical words that were supposed to help me make sense of the mess my life had become. But nothing made sense anymore. After what felt like an eternity, Jennifer came downstairs, dragging her suitcases behind her. She stopped in the doorway, looking at me with eyes full of regret, her lips trembling like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. "I'm leaving now," she finally said, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear her. I nodded, unable to look her in the eye. "Okay." She stood there for a moment, just staring at me, like she was waiting for something. Maybe she was hoping I'd change my mind, that I'd tell her to stay. But I didn't. I couldn't. "I'm sorry, Richard," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't respond. What could I say to that? I watched her turn and walk out the door, watched her load the suitcases into her car and drive away. The sound of the car fading into the distance was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. And just like that, she was gone. I stood in the empty house, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. The space around me felt cold and foreign, like it wasn't mine anymore. It was just a place full of memories I no longer wanted, memories I could no longer bear. I thought that once she left, I'd feel some sense of relief, maybe even peace. But all I felt was an emptiness I couldn't shake. The house felt quieter, sure, calmer, in a way, but it also felt lifeless. And so did I. Over the next few days, I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away the traces of her, throwing out anything that reminded me too much of her. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't clean away the memories. They clung to every corner, every shadow, mocking me. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the pain with deadlines and projects. But even at the office, my mind wandered back to that moment in the hallway, to the look on Jennifer's face when she saw me standing there, watching her with another man. I couldn't escape it. The betrayal played on a loop in my head, over and over, until it was all I could see. One night, about a week after Jennifer left, I found myself back on the couch, a bottle of whiskey in my hand. I had been doing better, or at least I thought I had. But that night, the loneliness hit me harder than ever. I missed her. Despite everything, I missed her. The house felt too big, too empty without her in it. I kept expecting her to walk through the door, to come back and tell me it was all a mistake, that she still loved me, that we could fix this. But she didn't, and she wouldn't. The reality of it all settled in, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. This was my life now, alone, empty. I was halfway through the bottle when I heard a knock at the door. For a second, my heart jumped. Maybe it was her, coming back, begging for another chance. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Jennifer. It was Dave. He looked like hell, his hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. He couldn't even meet my gaze, shuffling his feet awkwardly on the doorstep. "Richard," he stammered, his voice barely audible. I don't know what to say. "I'm so sorry, man." I didn't move, didn't invite him in. I just stared at him, the fury I thought had burned out flaring up again. Dave, the man who had destroyed my life, standing there on my doorstep, acting like he was the victim. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, his voice shaking. I never wanted to hurt you." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You didn't want to hurt me? You slept with my wife, Dave. You betrayed me, both of you. And you're standing here like it was some accident? Like you just tripped and fell into her bed?" Dave flinched, his face contorting in guilt and shame. "It wasn't like that. I don't know what happened. I got caught up in it." "Caught up in it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You got caught up in screwing my wife behind my back. What the hell is wrong with you?" He hung his head, unable to meet my eyes. "We're not together anymore," he mumbled. "It ended right after you found out." I couldn't live with the guilt. I couldn't look at myself knowing what we did to you. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He looked like a broken man, standing there, pleading for forgiveness. But then I remembered what he had done, what they had both done, and whatever pity I might have felt disappeared. "I hope you've learned something from this," I said coldly. "Because I'll tell you one thing, Dave, you've destroyed more than just your life. You wrecked mine, too." He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I have," he whispered. "Believe me, I have." I stood there for a moment longer, staring at him, waiting for the anger to subside. But it never did. It just simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the betrayal I couldn't escape. "Get out of here, Dave," I finally said, my voice flat. "I don't ever want to see you again." He nodded, mumbling another apology before he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. As I watched him go, I felt something shift inside me. I had spent so much time drowning in anger, in heartbreak, in betrayal. But now I just felt empty, hollow, like there was nothing left. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe that meant I could finally start letting go. After Dave left, I stood there for a while, staring into the night, the cold air biting at my skin. Something inside me felt different, like a final piece of my old life had been chipped away. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the same way. It wasn't the fiery rage that had consumed me since the moment I caught Jennifer with him. Now it was just emptiness. A dull ache that I knew would never fully go away, but maybe, just maybe, I could live with it. The days passed, and I forced myself to keep moving. I started going back to work, trying to lose myself in the monotony of deadlines and meetings. I knew I wasn't performing at my best, but it was better than sitting at home, drowning in memories. I even started hitting the gym again, channeling all that leftover anger and frustration into something physical. At first, I hated it. Every push, every pull of the weights reminded me of how exhausted I was, how tired I felt inside. But slowly, as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. The workouts became easier. My body felt stronger. The heavy weight in my chest began to lift, little by little. It wasn't just the physical side of it. The routine, the discipline. It gave me something to focus on. Something that wasn't the constant replay of Jennifer's betrayal. Around the same time, I reconnected with a few friends I hadn't seen in years. Funny how being in a relationship can sometimes make you lose touch with people. I guess I hadn't realized how isolated I had become until Jennifer was gone. My friend Mike was the first to reach out. He'd heard about the divorce through the grapevine and insisted we grab a drink. I was hesitant at first. Talking about it felt too raw, too real. But sitting at the bar with Mike, laughing and talking about old times, it felt good. Normal, even. Over the next few weeks, I started making an effort to go out more, to remember what life was like before Jennifer. Before the marriage, before the betrayal. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when I still found myself back on the couch, staring at the whiskey bottle, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. But those nights were becoming fewer and farther between. I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Sai, the guy whose wedding had started this whole nightmare, had been one of the first people to reach out after everything went down. At first, I had avoided him, too embarrassed to talk about what had happened at his wedding. But Sai, being the great guy he is, wouldn't let me slip away that easily. He dragged me out one night for dinner and convinced me to start seeing a therapist. I wasn't keen on the idea, but Sai had always been one of the few people whose opinion I actually trusted, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Therapy was uncomfortable at first. I didn't like the idea of picking apart my emotions in front of a stranger, but session by session, I started to realize how much I had been burying. Not just the pain from Jennifer's betrayal, but all the insecurities, all the doubts I'd carried with me throughout our marriage. Things I hadn't even admitted to myself. It was in one of those sessions that I finally said the words out loud. Jennifer's infidelity wasn't my fault. I know it sounds obvious, but for months, I had been torturing myself with thoughts of what I could have done differently. Was I too distant? Was I not enough for her? Did I fail as a husband? But none of that mattered in the end. Jennifer made her choice, and it wasn't my responsibility to carry the weight of that decision. I started to forgive myself for not seeing the signs, for not being able to stop what happened. I began to accept that I couldn't change the past, but I could take control of my future. About 2 months after Jennifer moved out, I ran into Dave at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked rough, like the guilt had been eating away at him since the day he left my doorstep. When he saw me, he froze, his face going pale. "Richard," he stammered, his voice shaking. I don't know what to say. "I'm so sorry, man. A few months ago, I would have punched him. But now, looking at him, I just felt nothing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I just felt like I was ready to move on." "I know," I said simply, my voice calm. "But it did happen, Dave. We can't change that." He nodded, looking down at the floor like he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. "Rebecca and we're not together anymore," he muttered. "It ended right after you found out. I couldn't live with the guilt, knowing what we'd done to you." I sighed, more out of exhaustion than anything else. "Good," I said. "I hope you've learned something from this." "I have," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to be a better person, trying to make things right." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, this man who had been a part of the worst moment of my life, and realized that I didn't need his apology. Not anymore. I had already started healing, and I didn't need his guilt weighing me down. That's all any of us can do, I finally said. Try to be better. As I walked away, leaving Dave standing there in the produce aisle, I felt a strange sense of closure wash over me. I knew I'd never forget what had happened, but I was ready to let it go. Ready to stop letting Jennifer and Dave's choices control my life. I wasn't fully healed, not yet, but for the first time, I felt like I might actually get there. The weeks following my run-in with Dave felt like a turning point. It was as if I had finally closed the door on that chapter of my life, leaving the betrayal and heartache behind. I knew I still had work to do. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but for the first time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Around that time, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I took a trip. It wasn't anything grand, no tropical beaches or luxury resorts, but it was something for me. Something that didn't involve Jennifer or the life we used to have. I packed a bag, threw some camping gear in the trunk of my car, and drove up to the mountains for a week of solitude. The first few days were brutal. My muscles ached from the unfamiliar exertion, and I was out of breath more than I cared to admit. Every night, as I lay in my tent, the loneliness crept in, and I'd think about how much easier it would have been if I hadn't been alone. But that was part of why I was there, to challenge myself, to see if I could handle the silence, the solitude. And then something shifted. On the fourth day, I reached a crystal-clear lake high up in the mountains, the kind of place that takes your breath away, not because of the altitude, but because of its sheer beauty. I sat down by the water's edge, soaking it all in, feeling small but at peace. I hadn't felt that kind of peace in a long time. I closed my eyes, listening to the soft breeze rustling through the trees, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. For the first time in months, I felt free. That's when I met Sarah. She was another solo hiker, around my age, lean and sun-kissed from days on the trail. We struck up a conversation, just two strangers sitting by a lake, sharing stories about the journey that brought us to that moment. Her smile was infectious, lighting up her whole face, and we clicked in a way that I hadn't expected. As the sun started to dip behind the mountains, Sarah invited me to share her campfire, and we sat together well into the night, talking about everything. Our lives, our heartbreaks, our hopes for the future. At some point, I found myself telling her about Jennifer. It wasn't planned. The words just spilled out. I talked about the affair, the betrayal, the anger, and the pain. But instead of pity or judgment, Sarah just listened. And then she opened up about her own heartbreak, how her ex-husband had cheated on her with her sister. It's a special kind of betrayal, she said quietly, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. It cuts deeper than anything else. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. How did you get through it? I asked, genuinely curious. She smiled, but it was a sad smile, one filled with the kind of wisdom that comes from surviving something devastating. Time, therapy, and a lot of screaming into the void, she said with a soft laugh. But mostly, I had to learn to trust myself again, to believe that I was worth more than what he did to me, that I deserved better. Her words struck something deep inside me. I realized that's what I had been searching for all this time. Not just healing, but a sense of worth. A belief that I was enough, regardless of what Jennifer had done. That I didn't need someone else to validate me or make me whole. We exchanged numbers that night, promising to keep in touch, though I didn't think much of it at the time. I wasn't ready for anything serious, not yet. But as I lay in my tent, listening to the soft sounds of the forest, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just for a new relationship, but for myself. The rest of my trip passed in a blur of breathtaking vistas and quiet moments of reflection. With each mile I hiked, each summit I reached, I felt pieces of myself coming back together. Pieces I hadn't even realized were missing. By the time I returned to the world below, my body was sore, but my mind and spirit felt lighter than they had in months. Sarah and I kept in touch after that trip. It started with casual texts about hiking and life, but over time, our conversations grew deeper. We met up for coffee, for hikes, for long talks about the things that mattered most. Slowly, something began to blossom between us. It wasn't the all-consuming, fiery passion I had once felt with Jennifer, but something softer, steadier. The kind of warmth that grows over time, like embers that keep burning long after the fire has died down. I wasn't ready to dive headfirst into a new relationship, and Sarah understood that. She had her own scars to heal, her own life to rebuild. But together, we found comfort in the slow pace of getting to know one another. There were no grand promises, no rushing into anything. Just two people learning to trust again, learning to love themselves before they loved anyone else. One evening, a few months after our first meeting, we went on another hike. It was a clear autumn day, the air crisp and cool, the leaves turning vibrant shades of red and gold. As we reached the summit, we sat down on a rock overlooking the valley below. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, filled with unspoken understanding. "I'm glad we met," I said, breaking the quiet, my eyes fixed on the horizon. Sarah smiled, her hand gently brushing against mine. "Me too," she said softly. "It feels like we were both meant to be here." I looked at her then, really looked at her, and felt something settle inside me. I wasn't healed completely, not by a long shot, but for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like I could be. That maybe, just maybe, I was ready to love again. Not in the same way I had loved Jennifer, but in a way that was more honest, more real. And more importantly, I was ready to love myself again. As we hiked back down the trail, the sun dipping low in the sky, I realized that this was the beginning of something new, something better. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. 1 year after I caught Jennifer with Dave, I found myself back at Sai's house. But this time, it wasn't for a wedding. It was for something entirely different, a divorce party. It was Sai's idea, of course. He said we needed to mark the end of my marriage and celebrate the beginning of my new life. At first, I thought it was ridiculous. A party? To celebrate my divorce? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Sai was right. This wasn't just an end. It was a new beginning. So there I was, standing in Sai's living room, surrounded by friends, sipping a beer and laughing at Sai's wild antics. It was surreal, thinking about how far I had come in just a year. 1 year ago, I was a broken man, drowning in despair and betrayal. I didn't think I'd ever recover. But now I felt whole again. Maybe not fully healed, but stronger in all the broken places, like a bone that had knit back together. Sarah was there, too. We hadn't defined our relationship yet, and that was fine with both of us. We were taking things slow, careful not to rush into anything after the heartache we had both endured. But being with her felt good. It felt right. She was a constant presence in my life now, steady, supportive, and always there with a warm smile that made the weight of the past seem lighter. As the party wound down and people started to trickle out, Sai pulled me aside. He looked at me with that same fierce pride and affection he'd shown me all year. "You know, I'm damn proud of you, Richard," he said, gripping my shoulder tightly. "You've been through hell and back, but you never let it break you. You picked yourself up, dusted yourself off, and kept moving forward. That takes real strength, man. Real heart." I hugged him, blinking back tears I didn't expect to shed. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sai. Without you and all my friends. You were there when I needed you the most." Sai grinned, punching me lightly on the arm. Damn right I was. And don't you forget it. As Sarah and I said our goodbyes and walked out into the warm summer night, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the countless moments of anger, fear, and doubt. There were days when I thought I'd never get through it. But through it all, I learned something invaluable, something I hadn't fully grasped until now. Betrayal doesn't define you. It hurts, yes, but it doesn't have to be the thing that breaks you. Healing is possible, even when it feels like your world has ended. I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of bitterness and resentment. Most importantly, I learned that I was stronger than I ever realized. That I had the power to choose my own path, to create my own happiness, and to love again. As Sarah and I drove away from Sai's house, the road stretching out before us, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past year had tested me in ways I never imagined, but I had emerged from the flames, tempered and stronger than before. There would be more challenges ahead, no doubt about it. Life was full of them. But I knew now that I was ready for whatever came next. I glanced over at Sarah, her hand warm in mine, and smiled. I didn't know where this new path would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. 1 year after the darkest day of my life, I was finally ready to let go of the past and embrace whatever came next. I had myself, my friends, and a life full of possibilities ahead of me. And in that moment, I knew that was more than enough.